Hello friend, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we are going to do a tutorial on how to use your iPad Pro for hand lettering. And this is going to be kind of a overview of lots of the things that I think you need to know when it comes to hand lettering on the iPad. So I have a similar video to this, and it's a pretty fast-paced video to kind of get you an overview in about 20 minutes. However, one of the requests that I hear on that video is that you guys would like something that goes a little bit more slowly, maybe you could grab your iPad and follow along with me. So that is what we are going to be doing today. So this may be a little bit longer of a video, but I will put the timestamps in the description box below so that you are able to kind of click around if you are wanting to come back and look at something again. But my hope is that you can get cozy, grab your iPad, and learn right along with me in this video. So let's get right into how to use your iPad Pro for hand lettering. To start out, I have the iPad Pro, and then I have the second generation Apple Pencil here. Now, I also do have an iPad that uses the first generation Apple Pencil, and then I have the original iPad Pro that uses that first generation as well. And I like all three of them, so you definitely don't need this model. What we go over today should pretty well translate to whatever model that you're using. One of the exceptions is how to connect the pencil. So with the original iPad Pro, you are going to take your pencil and you'll take the little cap off and plug it into the side to connect it and to charge it. But with this one, there is a magnetic spot right here that we can just attach our pencil to, and that is going to show me what my Apple Pencil is charged to, and then we can get started with our hand lettering. So to start, we are going to be using the app called Procreate. Now, I have tried several different apps for hand lettering, and this one is still my favorite. I definitely think it's worth a purchase in the App Store. There is so much you can do with it, and there are so many different brushes you can try, and you can even import your own brushes, or you can purchase other brushes, and I really don't often use any of the others that I've tried. So here we are at the main screen, and as you can see, I have some of my artwork in stacks here. And I created some cover pages for them just to make it look a little bit cleaner, but I need to do that for the rest of them. But I really like having them organized this way so I can kind of visually see what everything is. So first we're going to start by creating a new canvas, and we can do that by pressing the little plus sign right here. Now, as you can see, there are some canvas sizes here. There's screen size, a square, and a few other different ones here. But I'm going to show you how to create a custom canvas size. So if we press this rectangle here that has a plus sign on the left hand side, we are going to open up this custom canvas section. Over here you can choose dimensions, or you can choose color profile if you are going to be printing these out versus if you're making something digitally. You can change your time-lapse settings, and there are canvas properties here. But I'm going to go back to dimensions, and then we are going to choose our dimensions. So I'm going to create something that is made for a print size. So an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. As you can see, it's already filled in with pixels, but if we go down here, we have pixels, inches, centimeters, and millimeters. I'm going to choose inches, and then I'm going to do 8.5 by 11. And then down here we have the DPI and your maximum layers. So we will get into layers in a little bit. But right now with the 300 DPI, we are able to use 75 layers. Now that's plenty for me, and 300 DPI is plenty high quality for me. But if you wanted to change it to something super high, you could do like a 600, but then we are only able to use 15 layers. So just keep that in mind, and in general, I think that 300 DPI is a good place to start. So I'm going to do that, and now we have 75 layers, and I'm going to create our canvas. Here we have our 8.5 by 11, and you can turn it sideways if you'd like. I often size it quite large so that I can see really closely what I'm doing. And then to get it back to the screen size, you just pinch and let go. And then we have our canvas filled out here. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you where the brushes are. Your brushes are right here, and there is a brush library with a lot of different styles of brushes. Now I do have some custom brushes in here that I've purchased, but there are so many that come with the app already, so I would recommend just testing those out and just kind of going through and coloring them and seeing which ones you enjoy using. For hand lettering, I really like using the 6B pencil for sketching out a design before I get to the finished piece. I also like in the calligraphy section, there is a monoline brush, which I really like, and there are just a lot of different fun ones to try here. Now, one thing you'll notice is that some of your brushes have thick and thin strokes and some don't. So in brush lettering, we often have a thicker downstroke and a thinner upstroke. But with some pens, like that monoline pen, we are going to see the same thickness no matter how hard we push. So if you are using a pen that is a monoline style of pen or that doesn't have thick and thin strokes, then just make sure you are aware of that, because sometimes I hear that people are not able to get the thick and thin strokes to work, and they should work if you are using a brush that has pressure sensitivity. So I recommend the Apple Pencil. I have never tried the other brands. I can't speak to whether or not that is an issue, but if you do not have a brush that also has the thick and thin capabilities, then you're probably going to get strokes that look similar or the same thickness. So now that we have our brush, I'm going to show you a few things that might be helpful. So the first thing that I want to show you is this. So the first thing that I want to show you are these tools over here. Your sizing control is right here. So you can move that up and down to get a thicker or thinner line. The second slider here is the opacity. So you can turn that up or down to have more or less opaque of colors. That being said, I don't really use this one very often because you can actually turn down the opacity after the fact, so I'll show you that in a little bit. But if we were to hand letter using, let's say, 50% opacity, and I'm going to make this really big so that you can see, and we are to letter our A, you can see where there's an overlap right there. So if you don't want that, you can always letter at full opacity, and then we can turn it down later when we get into layers, and I'll show you that in a little bit. The next thing that I want to show you are gestures. So in order to delete or undo a move that we've just created, we can go right here and press the undo button. There's a little arrow that goes to the left and to the right, and we can undo or redo. However, we can also pretty easily do this using gestures. So if we use 2 fingers and tap, we are going to delete what we have just done. If we have gone too far, you can use 3 fingers to bring it back. And you can also do it faster by holding down 2 fingers or by holding down 3 fingers. And lastly, if you want to erase everything and you have a whole bunch here, you can go like this with 3 fingers and then swipe left and right. And we have deleted everything. So now we have a blank canvas again. We can make sure we have it at our screen size, and there we go. Now the next thing I want to show you about your brushes is the streamline feature. When you first get a brush, the Apple Pencil is really sensitive, and you'll see all of the little squiggles that you might have. Now, when I very first got my iPad Pro, I had to learn how to create super even lettering without the streamline feature. So I totally get how difficult it is, and I was able to practice and practice and practice. I had a really tight grip on my Apple Pencil, and I just really worked at that steadiness in my hand. And so it is something that you can do. However, I was very happy when the streamline feature came out, and I have no shame in using it. So let me show you here. If we go into our pen, I'm here at this monoline 1, which I probably duplicated it. That's why it says 1. But that is another thing that I'll let you know. If you are wanting to change settings in your brushes, it is a good idea to duplicate it, and then you'll have another one. And then now I have monoline 2. That way, if I mess up and I don't like what I did, I can go ahead and delete this one just by swiping left on it, and that's where you can share, duplicate, or delete. And that way I still have the original brush to go back to if I didn't like my updates that I did. But I'm going to go into our monoline 1 and just press it one more time, and we can see spacing, streamline, jitter, and fall off. I'm going to go right here to streamline and just pull this almost all the way up. And now, instead of having those shaky lines, you can see a very nice circle here. Another way that we can get nice smooth lines is by holding our pen down. So if you're struggling with those straight lines here and you want them to be more perfectly straight, you can go ahead and hold your line down, and that will snap it into place. So you can see, you can move it around, you can make it longer, and you can kind of adjust a little bit while it's here, and that will help you to get those really straight lines. You can also do a similar thing for when you create ovals, so I'm going to make this bigger so that you can see, but we can snap that into place as well. So did you see how that moved? And now I can move my B around, and then let go when I get it to how I want it to look. And this can work for your C shape as well. So instead of a C that looks like this, you can hold it down and it will kind of smooth out for you. And if you wanted a perfect circle, see how mine is kind of an oval, it's a little bit longer. It is definitely not a perfect circle. You can put one finger on the screen and that will change it into a circle. And you can still resize it like I was here, but now you have a circle. If you don't like these changes, you can do your delete and it'll go back to my original oval. All right, so the next thing that I want to show you is how to do some brush lettering with the iPad Pro and a few of the different things that we can do with our brush lettering. So I'm going to start out by going to a brush pen that I like. So one thing that I wanted to point out with a brush pen like this is that when I come to the bottom of my line, it does sometimes get a little bit more narrow, and I have a trick to help it not do that. But sometimes I get people asking how I get these bottoms to stay kind of thick, and I will show you. So when you're pushing hard and you start to lighten up, sometimes it can give kind of a weird look. Not necessarily that it's tapering off, but that it like goes down together here. And that's not necessarily ideal. So what I do instead is I will push down and then I'll kind of go back up with my brush pen. So I'll show you a really large view of that. I'll go down and then just go back up. And it's totally a habit. I don't even really think about it. And that just allows me to get those strokes looking the way that I want them to, even though the brush is not perfectly ending this with a squared ending. So one thing that I like to do when it comes to hand lettering is I like to work in layers. So we're going to go over here and talk a little bit about layers. The first button we press here shows us our background color, which mine is just white, and then I have my bloom. So if I were to be hand lettering a big quote or something like that, I could add another layer each time I add a word, which just helps you to be able to move things around a little bit more easily. And it also helps you if you've like overlapped two different things, you can remove one of them without disturbing the other one if they are on separate layers. So right now I have my bloom, and another way that I use layers is to kind of perfect my lettering. So when I'm looking at bloom, I like how it looks, but I feel like my B's a little bit too small for the rest of the letters. So I must have gotten a little bit bigger as I lettered. So a way that I could do this is I will use this to trace. So remember we talked about opacity. I typically hand letter at full opacity, but then we can go over to our layer and press the N button, and we have this first thing is opacity. So you can use this for many things, but one of the things that I use it for is to trace over. So I'll turn the opacity down to about 24% here, and then I have a second layer. So the way that you create a new layer is you simply press the plus button right there, and now I have a second layer. This layer is going to go on top of my bloom. Now if this layer, if I want to move them, you just grab onto it and pull it down, and now this layer is going to right underneath my bloom, so I wouldn't be able to trace. So let's say this is at full opacity, and I am lettering on a layer underneath it. Let's change the color so you can see. I'm not going to be able to see much. So that's why it's important to keep this layer up here, and then I'll be able to use that to trace. So I'm going to turn the opacity back down to 25% and then clear out this layer, and now I'm going to use this to trace. So one of my issues is that my B is a little bit smaller than the rest of my letters, but also it's maybe a little bit close. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace my B, but then I'm going to move it over. So there are a couple of different ways that you can grab onto something to move. And since the B is the only thing in my layer, I can simply press this arrow. Here it's going to grab on to my whole piece, and I can move it over just by moving my pencil. So I'm moving it back and forth, but I can just move it over a little bit so that I have a little bit extra space, and then I can go back to my tracing. Now let's say that I had a flower down here, which I'm not great at drawing, so forgive me, but I now don't want to move everything because I really only want to move that B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this tool right here, the third one from the left, And this is going to allow me to draw around my bee. So I'm going to just draw right around it. You can also do this by just tapping. This is helpful if you are doing like a whole word and you're trying to squeeze in between two really tight spaces, because what happens if you accidentally cut into something is it's going to move something that I don't want. So now I've cut my flower in half. So instead what I can do, if I'm just tapping little points here and then I've gone through, I can just tap back and, oops, I can just tap back, and now I can go back up and around to make sure that I don't grab onto that flower. So I'm gonna just move this over a little bit. So there are some settings down here. I typically like to use freehand. And then when we go to, now I've grabbed a hold of it, there's another setting I wanted to show you called snapping. So the way this works is my snapping is off right now, so I can go anywhere I want with that, which might not be a big deal, but if I'm trying to line up lettering, I kind of want it to stay across the same line at the bottom. So if I turn my snapping feature on, I'm gonna put magnetics and snapping, I can go ahead and it will just follow this line across. So this way I can know if I'm going up a little bit or down a little bit, or if I'm doing it just right. Some other things that you can do, let me show you with our little flower. You can flip it horizontally, you can flip it vertically, and you can rotate it using these here. And this might be helpful if you are creating patterns and you are wanting to use one shape that you've drawn, but to kind of customize it. So you can do all of these things, and then you can also resize it, you can also change colors, and you could get a really beautiful pattern out of one simple drawing. So I'm gonna delete this, and then we're gonna get back to our hand lettering. All right, so now that I have my hand lettering here, I'm going to just open up my layers and delete that bottom layer. And if I were working on an art piece or something that I was really trying to perfect sizing and where everything fits, I may do that multiple times, just over and over, until I feel really good about my final piece. And so that is why sketching things out is okay, because you can get your sizing all correct before you spend all the time working on perfecting what the actual letters look like. So that is definitely something that I use quite often. And now I'm going to show you some features that we can use to change up our word here. So the first thing is we can change our colors by going to our color palette over here. So you can choose at the bottom disc, classic, harmony, value, and then you can go to your saved color palettes. I'm going to go back to disc, and I'm going to use my color palette down here. So if you want to simply change the color of something that is all connected, you can just tap on the color and then bring it over here and drag it. And that is a super simple way to change the color. But sometimes not everything is connected. So in that case, we can just take in the airbrush tool, and I'm going to show you how to change it if the dropper is not working. So what we're going to do is open up our layers again and see where I have layer 2. I'm going to use 2 fingers and I'm going to swipe right. That is something called alpha lock, and you'll know it's on because you'll see a checkered background behind the wording. So now that we're in alpha lock, what's going to happen is when I write over things, it's not going to work unless I'm writing over where I already have lettering. So if I color down here, I have this orangish color on, nothing is happening. But when I go over here, it's going to color in my words. And that is super helpful for not only changing the color, but also to create some fun color blends. So let's go ahead and do some blending with some of the colors in my color palette. I am going to turn my airbrush down a little bit, and then I'm just going to add some colors here and there. I'm going to use this peachy pink color, and then I'm going to go back and grab this cream color. And I know this looks kind of funny, but we are going to blend it all together and it's going to look really fun. All right, so now we have some very interesting colors here, and we're gonna go up to this second tool over after gallery. And the second section down, you see 3 different ones that are blur. So I'm gonna use the top one, and then I'm gonna press the layer button. Now to adjust your blur, we're just going to simply slide our Apple Pencil across. So I wasn't touching there, but I'm going to show you what it looks like when I slide it across. So let's make this as big as we can. All right, and are you ready? That is what it looks like. So the next thing I want to show you how to do is to do a drop shadow. So one thing that can make your lettering pop is adding a drop shadow. So I'm going to turn my Alpha Lock off. You just do the 2-finger swipe again, and then I'm going to duplicate this layer. So I'm going to swipe left and then just press duplicate. Now remember I said whichever one is on the top is the one that you're going to see on the top of your screen. So I'm actually going to turn this top layer off. So to turn off a layer, we simply uncheck the layer. The reason it looks the same is because we have the second layer underneath, but if we were to turn both of them off, they would both be gone, but you can turn them back on. So if you are just unsure about something, you can just turn it off and decide later if you want to delete that layer. But right now, we are going to turn that off so you can see what I'm doing on layer 2. Now, just because the layer's off, I do still need to click into the layer underneath so that I can get to it. So if I'm trying to write on a layer that's not turned on, it will just give me this message. Hidden layer. The currently selected layer is hidden. So I'm just going to cancel that, but this is just to tell you that if you get that message, just go back into your layers and make sure we are on the correct layer. So now that I'm on this layer, I'm going to do my Alpha Lock again, 2 fingers swipe right, and then I'm going to make sure I'm still in my airbrush, and I am actually going to turn this into a different color so that it's one solid color. So I think that, let's see, red. This might not be the right color, but let's try it. I want something that's light enough that it won't be harsh looking, but dark enough that you will still see it. Okay, so I'm going to add a blur to this, but I'm going to turn off my Alpha Lock. So let's turn our Alpha Lock here and then go back to our blur and choose layer. And then I'm going to blur it so it looks like that. Now I'm going to turn my top layer back on, and I'm not going to leave it here, but I'm going to move it. So remember I said if we want to grab the whole thing, we can just press this arrow button and then we can move it all around. But because I only want to move it a little bit, I'm going to do that by simply tapping the screen. So you can tap anywhere on the screen and you're going to move it just a little bit. So I'm just going to tap a little bit over here, and you can see we have our drop shadow there. This is a pretty subtle type of drop shadow. You can do it as extreme as you want. We could also make the color a little bit more subtle. Let's do this pink color. And then what we could do is move it even more so that you can see it even further. So as you can see, there are so many options when it comes to hand lettering and so many different fun ways that you can use the tools that are in Procreate. So now that we're done with this piece, and this is how I want it to be, I'm going to merge these 2 layers together. So you can do this by just pressing once and then choosing merge down. And then I'm going to undo that and show you that you can also do it by just pinching the 2 together. So you can do that either way. I'm going to turn that one off, and then I'm going to add another layer for us to work on. So the next thing I want to talk about is color palettes. We have some color palettes here, but then I'm going to go over to palettes and we can create our own new palette. So I want to show you how to import photos into Procreate and a couple of reasons why this might be useful. I like to create like coloring pages, and sometimes I just like to try to draw or do like watercolor sketches, and I might take a picture that I already have and then use that as my layer to trace. So as you can see right here, I just have a picture of the carrots from my garden, and this is not finished, but I was just kind of playing around with what it would be like to trace. And so I put this one on the bottom layer and then kind of traced over it and then used that as a reference photo while I worked on the actual piece of art. So that's one way that it's really fun to import photos if you kind of want to sketch something but you maybe don't want to freehand it. So the second thing I do with photos is I like to create a custom color palette from the photo. There are 2 different ways that I'm going to do this, and one is a little bit more specific and then one is a little bit quicker. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm just going to import the photo into Procreate. So I'm going to press this wrench tool here, and then I'm going to press insert a photo. This will bring up my camera roll and I can just simply choose a photo that I had on my iPad. I don't have a lot on my iPad, but I do have this one, and we are going to choose colors using the color picking tools. So we talked about most of the things on this bar over here already, but you can actually choose the colors from your photo by pressing this square button here. So when I press that, you can see this circle showed up. Let me do it again. And I can go over here and choose a color, and that's going to be my top color. And by releasing, I now have that color right here. So when I press this open and open up my color palettes, I can make a new color palette by pressing the plus button right here. Then I'm going to choose Create New Palette. And to add a color to my palette, I simply press the button. So you can move around colors in your color palette just by holding onto them and moving them around. And you can also get rid of one of the colors by simply holding it down until it says delete swatch. All right, so that is a great way to curate a custom color palette if you want to be able to pick which colors are coming out of your picture. However, as you can see, there are a lot of different colors going on in this picture. So I'm gonna show you a little bit quicker of a way to do this. So we can go ahead back up to this circle where our color palettes are. And when we press that plus sign, you can see there's a few options. Create new palette is what we did already. New from camera, new from file, and new from photos. I'm going to choose new from photos, and I'm going to import this picture. And by doing that, we now have this huge color palette, and that just came right out of here. Now, if you had something that was a little more monochromatic, you might find a little bit more of a theme, but I have the rainbow here, so that is why my palette does not have a super strong theme. But let's say you went out to your garden and picked a bouquet of, 4 kind of color coordinating different types of flowers and use that photo, you might find something with a little bit more of a theme, which I'm sure would also be really beautiful. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is something that I get asked about a lot, and it's so simple, but it's how to change this interface to be light instead of dark. So we're simply going to go up to the wrench tool, choose Prefs, and then you can see it says light interface. So I have it on right now, and if I turn it off, it is dark. Totally a preference. Another one that you can also choose right below, it says right hand interface, and by pressing that, this toolbar is going to come over to your right hand side. So there are definitely a lot of other things in this part of Procreate which you can totally play around with, but I wanted to show you some of the things that I use most often. So the next thing that I want to show you is how to add text into the app. So we are going to choose again the wrench tool, and then we're going to press add, and then add text. This is going to allow us to type text right into the app. So I'm going to press this AA right here, and then I can get to some of the features. So you can make it bigger, you can spread apart your letters a little bit more under kerning, you can change the font, and I have actually imported a font of my own into here, so I can actually use a font that is my own handwriting in my Procreate apps. So if you guys want to learn more about making fonts out of your handwriting in Procreate, let me know. But this is a font that I created. We can treat it like a layer here where we can move it around, we can add a layer on top of it. Once you merge this together, I don't believe you'll be able to change the text anymore. So I do like to keep my text on its own line. So for example, if I grab some pink and we letter right over it, so now I have my lettering on top, but if I want to change this, I can just press this layer once, and then I can go to edit text. And here I can press that AA again and kind of change this around to however it might fit best. However, once I merge this down, I no longer have the option to do that. So if you're using text, I recommend leaving it on its own layer just to make it easier on yourself if you want to make changes later. Even sometimes I have merged them together because I knew something was completely finalized, but then later on I wanted to come back and duplicate that, and I wasn't able to because my text was merged together. So rule of thumb for me is always leave the text on its own layer, because you never know, you might want to duplicate that. So one of the next things that I want to show you is how to create gifs in hand lettering, or is it gifs? I don't know how you say that. I say gifs. But let's go ahead and get a new canvas and let's do a square. I'm going to tilt my iPad a little bit, so I hope you can still see, but I'm going to do some hand lettering. It's easier for me to hand letter with it tilted a little bit. All right, so I am hand lettering again using that monoline brush, and I'm going to do a couple of layers of the same lettering, but I'm going to go over and just try to do it as similar as I can. I'm not really trying to make it different, but naturally, because I'm tracing, it's not going to be identical, and that is how we make our GIF or GIF. So I'm not worrying about them being perfectly identical, but I'm also not like specifically trying to make them super different. So then I'm going to do another layer, same thing. And let's just do 4 layers. Now I'm going to go back and turn the opacity back up on all of them. I only did that so that I was able to trace them. Like I showed you earlier, I just turned the opacity down so that I can trace them pretty easily. Now we are going to go up here and press share. And we are going to do an animated GIF. Now, one thing I'm going to do before we get there is I'm going to turn off my background layer. That way it's just the letters and the white is not going to be behind it. If you were importing these into somewhere else and you were like laying them over on a picture, this would help you to not have a background layer. So I'm going to press animated GIF, and then I am going to do something a little bit slower, like 5 or 6 frames per second. So here you can see a really fun way to create simple GIFs and use your hand lettering for that. So I was simply writing the same thing over and over a few times and having a little bit of variation each time, and that creates something really fun and unique. So I hope this tutorial was helpful for you and covered a lot of the things that you would need to know when it comes to hand lettering. If you are wanting to learn how to hand letter, I have a free 7-day hand lettering course that you can find on my website at howtohandletter.com/mini course. I will also leave that in the description box below as well. I also have a blog post if you prefer reading that goes along with a lot of the things that we talked about here today, if that is helpful for you. Also remember, I will put those timestamps in the description box below if you want to come back and relearn anything or look at anything over again. But again, I hope this was so helpful for you. I will go ahead and leave a playlist here for my other iPad lettering videos. I have been creating hand lettering videos for about 4 years now, and I actually started with iPad lettering way back when I had my first iPad Pro. So all that to say, I really love this investment. If you are wanting to start a hand lettering business, I would totally recommend getting some way to do digital lettering, whether it is with the more inexpensive iPad and the first Apple Pencil, or the iPad Pro and the Apple Pencil 2. I have them both, and I really like them both, and they have been a game changer for running a hand lettering business. If you want to follow me more, you can find me on Instagram at howtohandletter. I also have a blog where you can find more hand lettering tips, tricks, and tutorials. Again, thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next one.